Kiki is going to stay right where she is while I introduce the next panel, which will talk about leveraging the power of institutional procurement to change our food systems for the better. I want to welcome Yael Cypers, the Director of Procurement for the Alice Waters Institute for Edible Education and Regenerative Agriculture, Dayanny de la Cruz, the Vice President of Culinary for Levy Restaurants, Molly Riordan, who is the Director of Institutional Impact at the Center for Good Food Purchasing, and Sapna, Thottathil, who is the Managing Director of the University of California Center for Climate, Health, and Equity. And then again, back to Kiki. Welcome them all, please. Round of applause.
Hi, everyone. So I'm warning you now. You are going to be listening in on a conversation that we've already been having for the last few days. So we are going to continue the conversations that we had from last night. I will give you some context, but there's been a lot of heated debate and describing of stuff, and a lot of, you'll see. Okay, so starting off sort of in the middle of things, Dayanny, hi.
Hi.
How are you?
Good morning, everybody. By the way, we did not call each other this morning to all wear black.
Oh, oops. We're very serious business people.
I know.
So we were talking last night about sourcing and reducing waste for large sports events, and that is sort of your specialty.
Yes.
So jumping right in, can you tell me about sourcing for large-scale events like the Olympics or the World Cup? What goes into planning and ensuring that at the end of the day, food doesn't go to waste?
Well, that's very interesting. Well, good morning, everybody, again. I work in a very special environment because we feed people with stadiums with 75,000 seats, and we can go to a museum feeding people, 175 people in a cafeteria. But for large events, I feel like it was very important for us to first and foremost create relationships with Niman Ranch. I remember the first time that I actually served Niman Ranch at Harley-Davidson Museum in Milwaukee. And this is, I'm going to say 15 years ago, give it a take. But also, I feel like many years back, transparency was something, and I think somebody was talking about the humbleness of not communicating with even your own vendors. And I feel like that's what we started. We started creating the transparency of going to them, and then they'd be able to come to us and opening the door. And then I feel like once we did that, we created value from everybody that came through the door, especially in Levy restaurants. Again, I've always said, anywhere we go, we are able to make or break something. And a small vendor, a farm, anybody that's around the big buildings that we come and put in certain places, I call them the white elephant. So I feel like my job, especially in Levy, is to kind of create the pro-human approach to those big buildings. And with that said, then we create, from the beginning, we start creating transparency, relationships with our vendors, and then we start creating the lines of how do we make sure that there's no waste. We have something that is called Waste 2.0. We create a very robust food rescue system all over the country. We work with food rescue. So we manage agencies to pair with all of our venues. We actually donate to pig farms as well. So if anybody is interested, we open the doors for them as well. And for me, the most important one of those is food rescue, because I feel like we are touching people from a different perspective. So we give value to the product from the beginning, and at the end, we actually bring it back to the tables of a lot of people around the country, and not just as a waste, but actually we're feeding literally humans. Bringing people back to their table. So I feel like it's the best sustainable way to do it. And we do it for many big events. Super Bowl in Vegas, we donated 29,000 pounds of food after Super Bowl was done. It took us 3 days. And we are working diligently to do that for the rest, for the next big events that we have. So I feel like it's a sustainable way to do it.
All right, Molly, I'm going to turn things over to you next, because you were also part of this conversation, and you had mentioned raising protein and putting all the effort that goes into it. How do we best steward these ingredients? And, sorry, this is a two-part. Okay, so how do we best steward these good ingredients? And you had also said that one of the biggest barriers to increasing institutional demand for good food is public institutions' requirement to purchase the lowest cost foods. So you called it an old anti-corruption strategy codified in state and local laws. So how do we make these policy changes? How do you make these policy changes?
Well, it's not going to be just me. So going back to Dayanny's point about big events, when I'm talking about institutions, I'm talking about K-12 schools, hospitals, senior centers, but cultural institutions like the Super Bowl are also institutions. And so we need to think about how we're creating value from end to end. That means that we are purchasing foods that have high quality, that are delicious, that people want to eat, not throw out. And then if there is extra, like you were pointing to, what comes next? All of these institutions are places not just for feeding, but for education. And like Kiki was saying, we have decided in a lot of these institutions, culturally, all of us, that the best way to feed people in those places is to spend the lowest amount of money as possible. That means that we think, culturally, our kids deserve the cheapest food. Our elders, our veterans deserve the cheapest food. But I just don't believe that any of us think that that's true. Certainly the people up on this stage don't. I don't think anybody in this room does. And so what we need to do is think about how all of us, from our different pieces of the food system, are thinking about how we can advance our public institutions and public dollars to actually have public benefit, which means encouraging them to buy the foods that are going to be good for the next generation and for the environment they're going to be living in.
That means I'm going to turn things over to Yael. So the Alice Waters Institute leverages the collective purchasing power of institutions' food to transition the agricultural landscape towards regenerative farming. Tell me about some of your greatest hurdles. Talk to me about your previous experience of Sweet Green, and tell me what changes can be made to flip the script so that we're starting not from going from what we need on the menu to sourcing, but rather from sourcing to the menu.
Well, transitioning institutions, our hospitals, our universities, our schools, to procure regeneratively has many hurdles. I think one huge one is education and culture and really shaping hearts and minds. And I think that buying regenerative ingredients isn't just like going to the grocery store and switching toothpaste brands. It isn't going to your order sheet on your distributor list and clicking different boxes. You know, it's really building those direct relationships and working in a really, really different way. And so one example or one tool that we work with in a project that I'm running with Los Angeles Unified School District, which is my local school district. You know, they have 450,000 students and over 700 schools in Los Angeles, and they're looking to shift their entirety of their procurement. And one of the very first things that we did in that project was bring the leadership of the food service teams out to the farms and started to build those relationships and have those conversations. And one of the very first things when we asked, tell me about the challenges of being a small to mid-sized producer or a person that's really trying to do something different in this environment. What are the threats to your business? They talked about climate volatility and how it's really affected, in this one example, it's created a lot of variability in the size of their fruit. And so they now have this huge crop of really small apples and really small stone fruit. And every year they're having to sell it to processors, and it's just really hurting their financial model, and they're worried about their success. And we're standing there with leadership of the second biggest school district in the country, and they're saying, well, gosh, what is tiny fruit really good for? Tiny humans. And so I think it was that first click of a moment that you think, wow, this was in my backyard. This was a 30-minute drive in Los Angeles to a farm. And really rethinking the way that you operate to be less transactional and understand that you have to build it yourself, and you have to get to know your food shed really well. So it's a really big shift in thinking and ways of working. Procurement looks really different in that situation. And I think the shaping hearts and minds is an obstacle that anyone we work with, that as we try to help an institution shift their procurement or shift their ways of working to regenerative, it's like, this isn't going to be easy. This isn't just checking boxes. We really need to shift the way that we do things. And I think, some of the other hurdles or challenges are systemic, their infrastructure. I think that actually really similar to the meat world, there's kind of this missing middle of aggregation and processing across all ingredients when you look to start purchasing regeneratively. And I think something that really surprised me as I shifted into this world is I learned that the majority of universities and schools don't have kitchens anymore. You can't bring in anything that's not a nugget or a patty or not fully chopped fruit. And then you have these small producers that you're trying to connect the school with, and they have, whole cuts of meat, or they have, unwashed produce. And you're like, how are we going to bridge this gap in the middle? So it's really interesting. I think there's also this huge gap of access to processing. But I think through, again, shifting mindsets to more creative thinking, one of the things that our organization, Alice Waters Institute, does is we host workshops where we bring together, 15 districts in a region and 10 to 15 local farmers. And, one of the great examples that we had, again, in those conversations of bringing everyone in the room together was, it was an area where each year there's an abundance of butternut squash. The schools say, we'd love to buy this, but we can't chop. We don't have kitchens. We don't have labor. And the farmers say, I have a local processor. I just don't know how much to, commit to at the beginning of the season. I don't know who wants what. And committing too much could ruin my business. And by sitting in that room together, we solved the problem. The district's committed.
We need to have conversations to become more nimble. So we had also spoken about how previously no antibiotics was one of the pillars of sustainability for purchasing for you before. And I know, Sapna, you are an absolute expert on this topic. So can you tell me, is it legitimate for us to treat no antibiotics as like a sustainable form of purchasing? Like, what happens if we have another pandemic? Tell me a little bit about the future.
This is a tricky issue for institutions as well. We know that there are a lot of antibiotic-resistant infections that can be traced back to overuse of antibiotics in animal agriculture. So I work a lot with medical doctors who are really worried about the antibiotic resistance that they're seeing in their patients, and we're running out of antibiotics. So this is a big issue, and as a result, in the University of California, where there are 5 health systems and 10 campuses, thinking about antibiotic-free poultry and meat has been an important issue. And when we've had big contracts come up for poultry and meat, the health systems in particular have really prioritized sourcing antibiotic-free, no antibiotics ever. There are several antibiotics label claims that have different meanings from poultry producers and meat producers. I said several label claims, and I think this is a hardship for institutions and consumers as well. They can't always tell the difference between the different claims that are out there. Some are stronger than others. Some are coupled with other claims about animal welfare that make the overall production process more sustainable and so on. But institutions, especially when they're having to make purchases and they're thinking about the bottom line, can't always tell the difference. So it's an issue that's important, really thinking about sustainability overall, but also really understanding the different claims is really, really confusing. So for example, in the height of the pandemic, I woke up in the morning and I heard on NPR that there was a huge COVID outbreak at a poultry processing facility in California, and over 9 people died initially. Several more people died afterwards from COVID. This was early on, before there were vaccinations and things. And we learned, as I was listening, I realized, oh my God, we have a huge contract with this company, the University of California. What are we going to do? And other people heard this report. We heard about it from this NPR news story, and then the LA Times broke it. We heard about it there first, not from the producer directly. And we came together, different food service directors, different folks from throughout the health systems and the campuses, and we debated what to do. We had such a heated debate. At the same time, there were all these poultry shortages across the country, and there were these changing public health guidelines, and people, there are many people who are like, we have to end this contract immediately, people are dying. And then there are others that are saying, well, this is sustainable meat. It's no antibiotics ever. We can't just end the sustainable contract. And then there are others that were saying, where are we going to get our poultry from? There's poultry shortages. We have people to feed. What are we going to do? And there's no one else that can supply the large volume of poultry we need on a regular basis. Anyway, I say all this because it's complicated, and we came to realize, as the University of California, we're changing our sustainability, what we defined as sustainable at the time. Long story short, we ended up keeping the contract, but we also started having debates about what does sustainability really mean. Antibiotics is a part of it, but it's not just the only thing, and so I would just end there.
Molly, you look like you have something to say in response to this.
I was just gonna, am I talking? Oh, great. I was just gonna say, thinking about proteins, there's a big opportunity when we are talking about proteins. Institutions are pretty traditional places, right? Meat is still the center of the plate. And when we want to increase the amount of protein that has these values, we need to pair it with education so that folks like the folks that Dayanny is working with are able to know how to menu it and to make sure that their costs are managed, but they can still prioritize these very important products.
Dayanny, you are a unicorn. You are going next.
I am a unicorn. I think you guys can. But that's extremely important. I think anybody that is in this business, especially in large operations, saw what happened in COVID. I can tell you I was getting calls from many different plants saying, we have an over surplus. I mean, pallets and pallets and pallets and pallets of meat that we were able to eventually, using for, we were feeding elderlies at some point. We were actually butchering a large amount of pallets of pork or beef. But I feel like where we're coming to is education. And I feel like it's very important that communication, that we start being very proactive when it comes to educating. And I think it's a two-way street. We started talking more proactively with our clients, especially just to let them know, it's about the experience. You buy a ticket, you want to eat the hot dog, you want to eat the hamburger, you want to kind of have this experience and premium and all of these things. But we want to let our clients know as well that the food supply chain that we are doing, it's very important. It's not longer buying the hot dog because it's very cheap. It's about understanding where it comes from as well. Who are we impacting? It's understanding what's around that product. And you'll be surprised when you have those conversations and when you sit at those tables. People look at you like another head is coming out of your neck. Like, what do you mean by that? And if you have and you buy 10 cases of hot dogs a month, I understand. But if you moving hundreds or thousands of pallets of hot dog, you do want to have this conversation because you want to have a streamlined system, but you also want to have a very, very transparent system. So have those conversations. And I think COVID kind of caught us there where conversations were not being had at that point.
Okay, so in the last 2 minutes, we are going to completely change the world, or at least come up with one way. So my question is, how do you educate companies on finding sustainable sources? How do we have more Dayannys in more institutions? What are some pillars of your playbook? Actually, no. What is one pillar of this playbook that you would like to institute? Yael? Everybody gets 30 seconds. Yael? And then we go down the row. Okay.
I'll echo some of my earlier points. It's very much around connection. I think when you think about starting this journey, finding new sources or starting out, it's all about reaching out to others who have done it. That's how I find my best sources, is calling folks that I used to work with, and then thinking really differently about how you connect with suppliers and vendors and farmers.
Cool. So connecting with suppliers. Sapna.
I think the communications.
Oh, sorry.
Go. A lot of things to say on this front, but I think to add is the communications is really important. Consumers, institutions they're so confused by all the labels that are out there. Get in front of them, show them what you're really doing, build those connections through communications.
Molly?
Help institutions measure what they want to do. If you're not measuring it, it doesn't matter. So if you want to make sure that you're being sustainable, supporting high animal welfare products, then you need to figure out what you're doing and set goals and work towards those goals year over year.
Dayanny?
Teach and find a way to educate your clients, whoever that is. It's very, very important that if you get that book, you understand and be honest about it. Very, very honesty is something that this business is crying for, especially in large institutions. Honesty and education, and go for it and start making copies of people that can represent yourself. So find that next person and start, like, I'm not gonna say breathing, harvesting the right way, the things that you want that person to do. So I feel like it's about educating that next person that is next to you.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Such an interesting panel, and I want to thank Yael, Dayanny, Molly, Sapna, and Kiki. Give them another round of applause. And I definitely hope we can clone people like Dayanny and all of these panelists who are changing the way we think about procurement.